Land of many waters with 6 races living together.
Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion, with the pros, the cons, the ones that has taken a side, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building.
Together.
Globespan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diasporas and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana.
Rohan Kanhai, Kofi and Dr. Jagan, Borbis, she gave us our great sons. Rohan Kanhai, Kofi and Dr. Jagan.
As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adopt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
Land of many waters with 6 races living together.
So, viewers, listeners, welcome to another edition of Globespan 24/7, owned and operated by Mr. Noir Singh, with our technical operator tonight, Mr. Devin Bassoon. We are continuing our discussion conversation on the Venezuela controversy and its claim to Guyana's legitimate territory. Discussing our topic tonight is former President Mr. Donald Rambutar, General Secretary of ANUG, a new and united Guyana political party, and CEO Mr. Colin Haynes, a financial expert, and someone that's no stranger to issues pertaining to Guyana, including its border controversy. Gentlemen, thank you all for coming and joining us tonight. Before we begin our discussion, we do have a short video clip about in tribute to the fallen soldiers who gave their life on this very matter that we are discussing. Let's take a look.
These families to know and the children to know is that these men are nothing short of national heroes. That these men live in honor and sacrifice for this country. Their children must grow up to know that their fathers pay the ultimate price for all of us, every single Guyanese. We can show that their sacrifice was not in vain is if we collectively come together as Guyanese and realize the one truth. When the storm is against us, it is all of us together who must ride against shipwreck.
Thank you again for that very brief video clipping. Ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing tonight the border controversy, the theme of this tonight's discussion, and we'll also leave it broad and open, is how do we prepare for Venezuela and its claim to our border territory. We have with us among the three distinguished panels again is Mr. Timothy Jonas, a senior scholar, senior attorney in Guyana, SC. And I don't know if it's would be okay if of you, Mr. Jonas, if you would just give us a little background about the claim of Venezuela again for our new listeners and viewers who may not be familiar with the issue or controversy.
Well, thanks, Doc. You took me by surprise. I'll do the best I can. The controversy started long before the Guyanas were English. In 1494, 2 years after Columbus discovered the New World, there was a treaty, Tordesillas, the Treaty of Tordesillas, between Portugal and Spain, two Catholic monarchs, where they split the New World in half and agreed that each would have an area of influence over half, and that half allocated to the Spanish the western part of South America, and to the Portuguese the eastern half of South America. They half split north to south. Now, after the various fights and wranglings, it is evident that Brazil, which is Portuguese speaking, is to the east, and the rest of South America, which is Spanish speaking, is to the west. And that actually is the last remnant of that original treaty made by two arrogant sovereign monarchies 2 years after, ignoring rights of everybody else. Well, of course, as we all know, England, France, and the Dutch weren't part of that, didn't agree to it, and there were many different fights and struggles for land among those countries. Eventually, England fought and defeated the Dutch, and therefore got a toehold in what previously had been Dutch Guyana, and British Guyana was then ceded by the Dutch in the early 1800s. The thing is, it was ceded from Suriname coming west, and the western boundary of the British Guyana territory was unclear. Venezuela, of course, laid a claim, going back to the Treaty of Tordesillas, saying that this thing is Spanish all the way to the Essequibo River. British Guyana, the British, claimed west all the way to the Orinoco River. And because Britain at the time was more powerful than Venezuela, and this is where might is right and the law is an ass, because Britain was more powerful than Venezuela, the Venezuelans very wisely decided that it would be more prudent to conduct that conflict via arbitration rather than in a fight. So they petitioned the Americans for more than 20 years. They lobbied the Americans, they cried and cried foul and cried wolf and everything, until eventually the Americans agreed through their Congress, they passed it through their Congress, a determination that the border dispute between England and the then independent Venezuela should be resolved by arbitration by any means necessary. This was done with Venezuela's lobbying. And the very happy Venezuelans appointed their arbitrators and their lawyers, and Britain appointed their arbitrators and their lawyers. And every Guyanese now has heard over and over that in 1899, in Paris, those arbitrators agreed that the Schomburg line, which is the boundary that we are all familiar with that separates Guyana from Venezuela, was the correct boundary. So in fact, the arbitrators gave a little to Venezuela and gave a little to Britain. They didn't give Britain all the way to Orinoco, and they didn't give Venezuela all the way to the Essequibo. They went somewhere in between. And the Schomburg line is the line we're all familiar with. The Venezuelans were not happy, but they acknowledged that that is now the boundary. They acknowledged and acceded and agreed that they were bound. Britain acknowledged, agreed they were bound. And a few years later, in 1905, a group of surveyors, peopled by Venezuelans as well as Britons, did a survey and established that line and signed off the agreement that this is the boundary between British Guyana and Venezuela. And that was the case for 60 years until one of the individuals who had been present at the arbitration died. And when he died, among the papers that was found as part of his estate was a bare allegation that the arbitration award had been influenced improperly by Russian influence. And that is the premise on which Venezuela has decided not just that the arbitration award is void, but that they now own Essequibo. And that is what we have been dealing with since independence in the 60s, because when we became independence, under Forbes-Burnham, a Geneva agreement was signed with the Venezuelans, which agreed that this claim by Venezuela that the arbitration award is invalid because it was obtained by fraud. Neither party would do anything active to change the status quo, and they would resort this dispute for mediation to the Secretary General of the United Nations and give the Secretary General, if his good office did not produce a happy result, give him the discretion to decide what forum to refer the dispute to for resolution. And after many years, the Secretary General finally acknowledged that his good offices were not working and referred the dispute to the International Court of Justice, as he was entitled to do, because both Venezuela and Guyana had agreed that if he couldn't solve the problem by his good office through mediation, he could refer the dispute to the forum of his choice as set out in the articles of the treaty of the UN Charter. So he's done that. As soon as he did that, Venezuela cried wolf, and they said he can't do that, but he did have the power. Venezuela had agreed. The reason Venezuela does not want this thing tried in the International Court of Justice is that they have not presented an iota of evidence to support their contention that something was wrong with the arbitration award. You see, that's the first thing they got to do. They asked for arbitration. They got arbitration. They participated. They appointed the arbitrators. They were heard fully. A decision was made. They signed on agreeing that they were bound by the decision, and they followed that decision. So if they want to set aside that decision, they have to show fraud. And they can't do it, because all they've got is somebody said so. And that's not enough. So they did not want to go to the International Court of Justice. They disputed the jurisdiction. The International Court rejected that and said, we have jurisdiction. You agreed under the Geneva Agreement. They then refused to participate. And as we know, the latest application in the International Court of Justice has been for this interim order, saying that they should not do anything which would jeopardize the status quo and jeopardize the final order of the court, International Court of Justice, when it makes its final determination on the merits of the case before it. And that is where we are now.
Well, thank you for that most succinct and brilliant history of the issue and the problem. And I thank you for providing that clarification so that people can have an understanding of why we are here, where we are. And thank you very much, Consul Timothy Jonas. Anything you would like to add to that, Mr. President?
Just a couple of strange things. One, I don't think that Venezuela was not satisfied with the award. I think they were very happy. In fact, they celebrated it, and they even produced a lot of postage stamps at the time when it was awarded to them. Their main concern in that award was the Orinoco, and because the British was claiming all the way to the Orinoco, and I think reading some of the evidence of the way they went about to draw this the line, the British had a pretty strong case because they were interviewing a lot of Amerindian villages in the area and asking them which government was coming and giving them services in these very areas. And most of the Amerindian villages were saying that it was the British. They knew the British and the British governor more than they knew anybody from Venezuela coming to them. However, that is immaterial right now. But when the award was granted, Venezuela was very happy because Venezuela got most of the land in that award. And they got, the main contention was getting the Orinoco and the Orinoco Basin. So it was the second thing that is needs some clarification. It's in 1844, this man wrote this letter, this junior consul. He died, and in 1849, this was revealed. But Venezuela didn't make any issue about it at the time. It didn't. They never made any contention about it. I think they saw it as nonsense, and therefore made no claim about it. But in 1962, that is about 13 years after this letter was revealed, that Venezuela made the first claim. When Venezuela made the first claim at that time, Guyana had just gotten internal self-government. The PPP was in government at the time. And the PPP took the position, along with the British and the Venezuelans, that all the documents should be investigated, the documents in the archives of the United Kingdom and the documents in the archives of Venezuela, and to see if there is anything that can bring any kind of evidence to this matter. That was done, and they came up empty-handed. No, they could find no evidence of anything to back the claim. And therefore, at that time, both the British and British Guyana government considered the matter closed. And that was where the matter was. Venezuela still from time to time made some remarks about it. But then before independence, in February of 1966, the British, along with the British Guyana government at the time, signed this agreement in Geneva, talking about finding ways and means to resolve this so-called dispute, and on the grounds that they wouldn't stop any independence to Guyana. So that is just what I would like to add, because I think these are important pieces of information for people, because really, I don't think Venezuela has a case at all. I mean, I'm not being nationalist here. I'm just dealing with the evidence and the facts. I don't think that Venezuela has a case in this regard.
Mr. Haynes, you would like to add anything to that before we discuss how do we prepare for Venezuela?
Yes. I'd like to, first of all, give my sympathies to the family and friends who have lost our service members. I know this is a tough time for a nation, and I think that it's important that we pay tribute to them and thank them for their service. Also for those that are continuing serving our borders and serving to protect us, whether it's police or military, we want to thank them as well. And for the two young men who've survived the crash, I also want to wish them speedy recovery, knowing that health as well is not only physical, but it's also mental and so forth. So one thing I would like to add is the fact that looking back at the whole issue, it seems like Venezuela is more preoccupied with the 1966 Geneva Agreement. And to me, I feel like that was a bit more loose, other than the Arbitral Award 1899, which is more definitive, which basically give the territory, rightfully so, to British Guyana and including Guyana. More so, I think that the 1966 Geneva Agreement, you had a tale of two. So you had a couple years of moratorium, which basically said that tell Venezuela, look, you guys are not going to do anything. Just relax. I also read somewhere recently where Hugo Chavez was former president of Venezuela, was a great admirer of Fidel Castro, and so Fidel Castro also encouraged him not to, continue or persist with this, and in the stead of being a good mentee and looking up to Fidel Castro, he actually sort of kept it lulled for a bit. Also, to note that part of the Geneva Agreement also guaranteed the good officers process, which basically had negotiators on both sides trying to meet and mediate with two sides. That happened for about 28 years or so, but the good officers process, as we've seen, wasn't very helpful. I think President Ramatar, up until your time, the good officers process was still going. I also remember, and if I'm not informed correctly as well, there was a small incident that had happened where an oil vessel was taken by the Venezuelan military at some point in time. I can't remember if it was President Jaglio's or it was your administration. So there's been constantly this antagonization by Venezuela. And right now, up until today, we see that in 2018, the Secretary General decided to take the matter to the ICJ. Now, in my opinion, I think that the Secretary General, this was his idea, or this was his intent to take the case to the International Court of Justice, but it didn't really represent the wishes of both parties or both sovereign nations, particularly Venezuela. So Venezuela, this is where I think that they're not very happy with the ICJ as the final process. And personally, I think that even given as we're going to have a meeting tomorrow, I think that it's important that we look really and think that whether we're in two different trajectories. So Venezuela doesn't want to recognize the ICJ ruling or the ICJ as the final ruling, and Guyana wants to recognize the final ruling. So that creates a bit of distortion. Also, like I said before, the 1899 border controversy, the border reward gave Guyana or British Guyana the land. Venezuela doesn't agree to that. They agreed to the 1966 Geneva Agreement, which is a more loose agreement. You can also see, if you read the letters for President Maduro, there is also seems to be a misunderstanding or somewhat misguided by the UN laws of the sea, which says every sovereign nation has about 200 nautical miles east. So Venezuela is saying, because the territory is being disputed, then the Essequibo is up for grabs, or the international seas, which is 200 miles out from the Essequibo River, where ExxonMobil and all the oil blocks are. They're saying that that's also up for negotiation at this time rather.
Mr. Rauta, do you want to comment on the remarks about Fidel Castro or Raul Castro's counseling to Chavez with regards to this?
I don't have any knowledge. I don't have any knowledge of the intervention of Fidel Castro on the matter. But what I do know is that Chavez has publicly, on more than one occasion, at least on 3 occasions, publicly said that this was not issue with Guyana and Venezuela, that this was an artificial issue and this was a created issue. Apparently, when Chavez came to government in 1999, I think it was, that he actually believed that the Essequibo belonged to Venezuela. But I think as he was in government for a while and studied all the documents and so forth, and probably engaged with people in Venezuela who knew better, he changed his position on that, and I think he had accepted that this matter was, for want of a better word, a kind of a nonsense. And he himself said that this was not a Guyana-Venezuela matter, this was an artificially created issue. He said it when he came to Guyana. At that time, Barret Jagdeo was the president, and he came here. I was out of the country when he came here at the time, but it is on record where he said, where he made that statement. So I don't know about Fidel, any input about Fidel Castro, but I do know that Chavez himself said that, and I know also that during the Chavez period in government, he never raised the issue at once. And even Maduro, he raised the issue on a few times. And Chavez was actually dying on his dying bed, and he was not in charge of anything anymore. That was when Guyana applied for an extension of the continental shelf, the 200 miles limit, and Venezuela had opposed it. And but Chavez was obviously not in control any longer. And I think that Maduro didn't do that at the time because I think he was convinced about it. I think that he was doing that because he would know that he was going to an elections, and he didn't want that to be an election issue, that he was being soft on Guyana, because the opposition in Venezuela was very vocal on this issue. Even when Maduro came here in 2013 on an official visit, the opposition tried to embarrass him by trying to come over into the Cuyuni and trying to make an issue of that. So now Maduro is raising this in a very sharp way, even more strong than the previous right-wing government. And again, I think it has to do with his internal politics. Because if he was Chavez's closest comrade in arms, and Chavez actually anointed him to take over from him, he obviously knew what was Chavez's position, and he never opposed Chavez's position on this issue. And now we got to look at why is he coming out at this point in time. There are two things. I think all of this is related to Venezuela's internal politics. He has lost a lot of support. We know that for whatever reason, he lost a lot of support. The opposition is getting their act together in Venezuela. They had agreed on one candidate, this woman who seems to be pretty popular, and he is trying to use this issue to galvanize some type of support for his flagging position at this point in time.
Thank you very much again. Again, I want to thank the speakers again, Mr. Timothy Jonas, for bringing up, giving us a nice historical review of what happened. Just to clarify the dates, I think Mr. Romtaro had misspoke about 1844 and 1849. I think he really meant 1944, 1949, 1962, and 1966.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't realize I said it.
And of course, 1899.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Jonas, anything you want to add before we proceed on how do we prepare for Venezuela?
I like the point that President Ramattar raised, that I think it's an important point not to be ignored, that when Chavez was president of Venezuela, it is true. I don't know about 3 occasions. I'm not expressing doubt about this. I'm just remembering the one that I was aware of, that he did acknowledge that the dispute was not something that was to be seriously followed by Venezuela. I think he as much as acknowledged that it wasn't real and that it should not be pursued, and recognize Guyana's sovereignty in the Essequibo region. And I do think that's an important point that I would like to echo, that was said by Chavez as president at the time.
No, this matter was not gaining international attention until recently, and Dana Romtar alluded to one reason, which is internal politics, and of course internal politics is very, very important. Next year, sometime in the latter part of the year, there will be general elections in Venezuela. And I believe the second point has to do, of course, with the discovery of significant amounts of natural resources, oil and rare elements. So that would be the second reason. Do you all want to comment on that? Those could be the reasons of why Nicolas Maduro is behaving the way he is at the moment. Colin?
Yeah, I didn't get your question. I think there was a cutoff in communication. Can you restate the question, please?
Right. So Dr. did mention that internal politics could be one of the reasons why Nicolas Maduro is making his wild claims and his bellicose statements with regards to our territory. And the second reason, of course, is the discovery of natural resources, oil and rare earth elements.
Yeah, I think that Nicolas Maduro, President Maduro, this becomes less about the Essequibo region. The Essequibo region, in my opinion, is being used as a leverage for other things. As you also know that previously, Nicolas Maduro had sanctions. So there were economical sanctions on him, particularly what was relating to him not being able to hold free and fair elections. And with that also came the reduction of the oil producing capability. As most of the world know by now, Venezuela has the highest amount of proven reserves of oil, somewhere close to 300 billion barrels. They have more than the Saudis. The Saudis are probably like around 290, 295. So just think about that. When we think of oil-producing nations, we think about the Gulf states, and just to think of the fact that you have this nation that sits right next to you is pretty much could be the oil giant for the world. And so with that, Venezuela also has used that leverage and that power to also initiate diplomatic relations, economic relations with other states. One of the notable ones we participated in and the CARICOM region participated in is Petrocarbi. And so you see, because of what has happened now, you have nations who are caught in a bind, particularly CARICOM nations, whether we stick with a guy who gives us oil and who has been a good economic partner, or we continue to join the partnership of CARICOM or the Brotherhood. And so you probably would have seen many different CARICOM member states, some of them, which I'm grateful that has taken our stance, and for some also who's decided either to sit on the fence or as clearly being on Venezuela's side. Now, also President Maduro is, as we said, he's facing lots of political attention inside. There is a very popular opposition leader. She's going to be president. I was also told that she's also facing some tremendous pressures from inside by the Maduro regime. I've heard of whenever she visits a restaurant or if she goes to the grocery store, the next day the grocery store is being investigated or they lose their tax license. And so it seems like President Maduro is under this constant pressure and trying to maintain a grip on Venezuela, and this becomes the issue where he is now using to leverage as well. There is also a school of thought that is out there that it also has to do with the oil operators, most notably Chevron. Chevron is now one of the operators in Guyana, and Chevron is now where they were in Venezuela as well. And so there seems to be some kind of school of thought of the thinking that maybe he wants to be able to re-engage with Chevron to have them also explore in it as well in Venezuela. So to me, it seems to be that this is one of the classical examples of international politics where you have to read beyond the issue of just what it is now, but there's great underlying issues um, as to what actually the the uh, the real the real issue, the real motive of President Maduro is. Now, to couple with that, I believe that we have been a little farther behind. In 1966 forward, Venezuela has taught their country. I mean, from kindergarten that Essequibo belonged to Venezuela. They've established diplomatic relations. They've redrawn maps, all these things, and I think that for us as Guyana, I think we've been behind. We've been behind in sort of putting out that education, and it seems like we're also playing catch-up diplomacy, which is probably not the best.
Okay, so let's now focus on the president's visit for this party confabulation discussion summit tomorrow in St. Vincent. Firstly, if I may ask, should the president be going? And if so, what should he be focusing, discussing tomorrow when he meets Nicolas Maduro? And present there would also be, as I now read, the prime ministers of Dominica as well as Trinidad and Tobago. The president of Brazil, Mr. Lula, will not be attending, but he will be sending an emissary. So, Council, Senior Counsel Timothy Jonas, what's your view? Should the president be going?
Well, let me just, before I answer that, briefly respond to what Colin said about educating Venezuelan children and changing the map, and us being behind in that regard. I'm not sure I agree with that. And the reason I don't agree with that is that Guyana has exercised sovereignty over Essequibo since independence, and it has never been challenged, and it's never been in any doubt in any school child's mind. And then every exercise book issued from the PNC regime back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s had a map of Guyana at the front of it. And there are very few Guyanese who have not traveled to Charity, Pomeroon, or over to Supanam, or do not know someone who is mining. Mining claims are given out, transports and leases are issued. We exercise sovereignty there. They speak English there and they use the Guyana currency there. So there has been a great deal of propaganda in Venezuela, yes, but I would hesitate to say that we're behind. We have been all the way up there. We've been to Bartica, we've been to Lethem, we've been to all of Matthews Ridge, all the places up there. But to go back to your question, Doc, I have a difficulty with knee-jerk reactions. And what I'm talking about is what I see the keyboard warriors commenting about. That I've seen statements that are uninformed, that we should send the Venezuelan ambassadors back to Venezuela, we should cut diplomatic ties. Those kind of statements that try to increase the temperature are born of a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding of history. As soon as you stop talking, the only thing left to do is fight. And I'm astonished that people don't realize that. If you close the door of communication, you close avenues of communication, the only way to resolve a conflict that remains to you is to fight. Therefore, all avenues of communication between sovereign nations have got to remain open. Have got to remain open. Now, when CARICOM, they started out with a tepid statement that didn't help very much, and they seemed to be dragging their feet, and it aroused my suspicion. I was disappointed with what I heard coming out of Barbados and those places. Finally, we're beginning to hear some statements that resonate a bit more in accordance with what we expect. But my suspicions are not placated yet. I do bear in mind that CARICOM has said, and I agree, that the status quo should remain, that they respect Guyana sovereignty, and that the parties should talk. Now, again, you do not close off avenues of communication, but you need to be very careful in what you're talking about. Ralph Gonzalez sent this invitation, come to my country, let's talk. On the face of it, it's a good initiative, and he gets a lot of praise for it. I'm bearing in mind that a year ago, I saw somebody had shared a newsreel with me that a year ago, a friend Colin talks about Petrocarib. Venezuela wrote off St. Vincent's Petrocarib oil debt. So I immediately sat back and I remember that
and Dominica's as well.
Our wealth is fledgling. It's not there yet. We're still a poor country. We've got great expectations. But Venezuela is and has for a long time been in a position of exerting influence where we cannot. And therefore, I believe that President Ali was wise and correct to accept the invitation to go and talk, because you never close avenues of communication. You never do that. But I also believe...
Can we stop? I have to take a break with an ad.
I'm sorry.
I said we have to take a break and we'll come right back. Devin?
Oh, okay.
Your online company allfromonesupplier.com has teamed up with Curry Roti Box Restaurant. They are now shipping some of the most tasty aloo pies, doubles, curry duck, goat, and chicken. Try their famous 7 curry vegetarian meals with bus-up shot, or Guyanese-style para the roti or dal pori. Allfromonesupplier.com is also shipping tasty cooked meals, meats, fish, curry powders, pepper sauces, and much more. They are the one-stop online shop for all your West Indian food, meat, fish, and groceries. Allfromonesupplier.com has free shipping to all U.S. states, and when in New York, visit their very own Curry Roti Box restaurant, located at 10306 Liberty Avenue, Richmond Hill. For convenience, let allfromonesupplier.com ship directly to your home in the U.S. Or visit locally their restaurant at Curry Roti Box, located at 10306 Liberty Avenue, Richmond Hill. Order anywhere in the U.S. on allfromonesupplier.com or locally in New York on curryrotibox.com.
Welcome back, viewers and listeners. So you are listening to Globespan 24/7, owned and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh, with technical operator Mr. Devin Bissoon. We are discussing the Guyana border controversy. Before the break, Mr. Timothy Jonas, Senior Counsel, was giving us a little update on whether or not President Irfan Ali should be attending the forum discussion confabulation meeting tomorrow in Venezuela. As he had noted, Venezuela had canceled the Petrocarib debt owed by St. Vincent of I think about $189 million. I'm not sure if it's US dollars or Eastern Caribbean, but also canceled was the debt of Dominica, I think right after the hurricane a few years ago. Mr. Timothy Jonas, please continue.
Thanks, Nisham. It was EC, if I remember correctly, but it's a substantial sum, and it shows that The Venezuelans have influence and can peddle that influence in a way that Guyana can't yet. But I believe that President Irfan Ali was absolutely correct, and in fact had no real choice. It was the sensible thing to do, to agree to a conversation. I think that he also was correct and sensibly put in writing the position that the conversation is not for the purpose of discussing the right and wrong of what is before the ICJ. That is for the ICJ to decide. You see, we have to be careful about propaganda. And it is very easy to take the slightest slip and to turn it into propaganda to rally and rabble rouse. The example I'll give is the last interlocutory order that the ICJ made. Guyana asked the ICJ for orders stopping Venezuela from holding the referendum. And the ICJ did not make that order. The ICJ made an order that had the equivalent effect, that Venezuela must not do anything to interfere with Guyana's current status quo sovereignty of Essequibo. But the fact that the order was not made in the identical terms as sought was treated in Venezuela and was sold to Venezuelans as a victory for Venezuela. That's the danger of propaganda, because it allows to ratchet up and rally. Now, Venezuela has been saying they refuse to accept the ICJ's jurisdiction, and they insist that this has to be solved by bilateral talks with Guyana. And it is very easy for them to twist, using political propaganda, the fact that President Ali is going to meet President Maduro, as to suggest that this is a victory, and at long last, as they have been demanding for many years, bilateral talks are beginning. Now, that needs to be guarded against. And I'm not sure that that penny has dropped among our leaders, that although we need to talk, it needs to be manifestly clear in capital letters, 6 feet high, all over the place. We're not talking about what's before the ICJ. And there needs to be a clear agenda that clearly excludes any discussion of what is before the ICJ. This is not bilateral talks. I hope that that is being made clear in English as well as in Spanish, so everybody knows, because I can see the one danger I can see, and I am saying right now, President Ali had no choice. He had to go and talk. He could not refuse to, because you do not cut avenues of communication. But it needs to be manifestly clear over and over again, in Spanish first and then in English. We're not talking about what's before the ICJ. We're not questioning what's before them. These are not bilateral talks on the dispute. And that's what needs to be said. And I hope it is said clearly.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ramutawar?
I agree more or less with Timothy on this issue, that we were invited to talk. We can't want to invite CARICOM to come and help us out when we had issues with, like, election time the last time, and then when they want to talk with us, we don't want to talk. And then we also knew that Brazil had an interest in this talk as well. So I agree that we should talk. Nothing is wrong with talking. I find it difficult, though, to see, even though announcements have been made. I'm just trying to put myself in Irfan's shoes. Because if you go to sit down in that atmosphere, it's hard that this issue wouldn't come up. But the main thing for me is that not to make any concessions on it, that the matter is in court. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't talk about it. I wouldn't say, my line would be that we should talk about it and say that let's hope it doesn't affect our relationship with our peoples and our countries and what have you. But the matter is in court, and we're not moving it from the court. That would be my position on the issue, that we are not making any compromise to remove the case from the ICJ. Because if we do that, then it's decades again before you can probably meet to the point where we are, where we have a possibility of bringing some type of conclusion to the issue. So yes, I agree that they should talk, but I think that we should hold firm on the course that the country is on in an effort to try to resolve the differences that exist there. I just want to comment a little bit about what Colin was saying just now about the question about oil might be another issue. I'm not so sure. I am not so sure that this is not a purely internal issue with Venezuela, because as he rightly said, Venezuela has the largest reserve of oil in the world, a huge amount of oil. If oil is an issue, then it's sheer greed. And the second issue is too that Venezuela is trying to do another thing. I think they're trying to get sympathy particularly from political forces that are more on the left, to try to talk about trying to make it look like if this was an issue with ExxonMobil. But when Guyana gave ExxonMobil a prospecting license, Maduro's party was not in government as yet. And when we decided to take this matter to the court, this decision was taken in 2014, to go to the, not to take the matter to the court, but to go to the Secretary General of the United Nations and to say that that we're not getting anywhere. From 1966 and now we've been talking, we're not getting anywhere. And we need to have some type of resolution. Colin mentioned that an Andarko ship was pulled out from here, and we couldn't continue to have this issue stymie our development. And that so oil was not yet discovered. Some people seem to forget that only a few months before oil was discovered, that Shell sold their shares to ExxonMobil for $1 because they didn't believe that they would find oil out there, and therefore it wasn't a question of oil that made us go to the court, back to the Secretary General to find another means of settling the issue. I don't agree with the two colleagues totally on the question of CARICOM. I think CARICOM's statement was pretty good statement in support of Guyana. And they made that to me is important. It is very clear. There's no ifs and buts about it, that they come out and say that they're supporting Guyana. And they have good relationship with Venezuela. They have some benefits they're getting from Venezuela, but that has not stopped them from coming out very clearly and say that Guyana is on the right to this issue, and we should continue. We should go to the court. We're trying to settle this matter in a legal way. So I think that CARICOM is fully on our side on this issue as well. The one other point I think that is not being made enough is that this matter seems to be with Guyana and Venezuela at the moment, but it involves Brazil as well, because we have a common border with Brazil. And a large part of the area that Venezuela is talking about, it's Guyana's border with Brazil, and Brazil recognized that border. Brazil recognized that it is a legal border, and they have no problem with that border. And that, I think, is another strong factor in our favor, that we have a common border with Guyana, Venezuela, and Brazil at the Roraima, and then we run a long border with Brazil, which Brazil recognized and accepted the award that was made towards Guyana at the time. Those are some of the comments I would like to make.
I think we should also appreciate the fact that Raul Gonzalez St. Vincent is in a very precarious, difficult position. He is chairperson of ECLAC, and therefore he cannot show his hands of which side he's supporting at this particular moment. I'm sure he's sympathetic with us, but at the same time, of course, he has his debt canceled by Venezuela. Any further points you'd like to make, Colin, on this matter?
Yes, I welcome our ability to dialogue. Matter of fact, I'd like to say that I think we should have talked about dialoguing early on. Howbeit, my suggestion would be a little improved by stating preconditions. So we should have gotten like a back channel to Caracas and speak about the fact that before we sit down and talk, the 1899 arbitral award is final and settled. The fact of the matter that they've been having border incursions, or they've been have a military buildup on the border, so have that removed. And also, one of the things that we forgot to talk about is the migrant crisis. You've got a lot of Venezuelans are coming over our border, and so one of the things as a precondition to discussion would be to be able to discuss or commit to having that as part of the discussions. And I think that with certainly there could never be a military solution. Venezuela has a military of 350,000, which is the adult population of Guyana. They've got an army and air force and a navy. So definitely military would not be an option for us. But they are our eastern neighbor. As the president rightfully said, it's just a portion of Essequibo. If you look at it, is really part of Venezuela. 2/3 of Essequibo's border is Brazil, and Brazil recognizes it. Matter of fact, Guyana was probably destined to be another 30,000 larger than it was. I think it was 33,000 square miles more. The Schomburg line had actually carved out. And so they have gotten that extra 30,000. And I think part of it also was Brazil as well. But it seems like they're not very contented with it. Additionally, we should continue engaging the UN, CELAC, CARICOM, OAS, and so forth. But I think that, as it relates to diplomacy, you've got to do the work. I think that we can continue to be a nation that is just solely continue to be relying on international actors like ICJ and so forth to solve some of the problems. I think we have to come up with a more creative and a more definitive diplomatic process. I've written recently about our diplomatic, our diplomacy. I think our diplomacy in Guyana really needs an overall. I think we play reactive diplomacy. I think if you look at Venezuela, how they've wrapped around Petrocaribe, how they've gathered how many diplomats and have been building support over this issue. I think we really need to look at our relations with the rest of the world and build those relationships, build those partnerships. Now, I've read the president's letter as well. I think that when you're entering negotiations like this, it's high stakes, it's high tense. I was thinking relatively to having Putin and Zelensky meeting. And I don't think if Putin and Zelensky got in the same room, they wouldn't be talking about a war in Ukraine. So certainly, our president to say that we wouldn't have a discussion about the border issue, to me, it's a little premature. We are meeting because of that. And I think we have to have that discussion. We have to sit down, we have to talk with our neighbors. We have to come to an agreement, some kind of agreement or consensus on the way forward. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a great controversy or inside of the whole diplomatic process. One is where Venezuela doesn't recognize the 1899. They want to recognize the more looser agreement of the 1966. The second one is they don't see the final authority as the ICJ. They see, us working together with them as a way. So essentially, if the president is saying that, this is where we are, and the other one saying this is where we are, I can't see there being an applicable settlement. Matter of fact, I don't see really much could come out of talk like that. And so I think that the conversation before these talks should have been a little less toned and focus on those preconditions that I mentioned. I would hope that tomorrow, I think Brazil has a very influential stake in it. I would have loved for President Lula to be part of it because he is a very skilled diplomat. He's got a lot of years of experience behind him. But I do hope that we can have a dialogue, can have a continual dialogue, and we can get this issue resolved. Because if you look at it as well, it's affecting not only the physical worry of people. I just talked to a mother a few nights ago, and she told me that she's very worried over this. So people's mental health, as a health professional, I have to mention is being affected by this issue. There's many discussions that are happening. I think also what this border controversy tells us is we need to do better with educating our people. So some of the things that you hear on a daily basis about this crisis tells that we've got to be able to put this into our school curriculum. We've got to integrate it. We've got to have our civil societies also play a role. I was thinking more about having symposiums, having ministries, having organizations, even at kindergarten. I think we need to start telling our kids about this controversy. This is history before our own eyes. I mean, it is. Very few times you actually hear that countries are actually fighting over a particular disputed territory. It happens a lot pretty much in Africa and Europe and so forth, but in South America or the Western Hemisphere, it's not quite very prevalent. So I think that walking away from this, I'd like to see us plan a lot more long term to be able to educate our population, and we need to dialogue. We need to dialogue with our eastern neighbor.
So how do we prepare for Venezuela? As Colin stated, we don't have the financial resources for an armed forces, and even if we do, we don't have the human resources to prepare militarily to push back or to face off or hold off Venezuela. So how do we prepare? It did suggest we need to improve on our diplomacy. We need to build a diplomatic staff that can engage more aggressively, robustly against Venezuela's position. Timothy, any views?
Well, first of all, I will say that our successive governments in this particular area, I believe, have done an admirable job. They have interfaced with the various international organizations. They've interfaced with the United Nations and its bodies. They have met with, they've invoked the agreement, and they've met with the ICJ, and they've proceeded very credibly before the ICJ on what is a strong case, and they've presented it well. They have interfaced with Brazil and the States, who are the partners most likely to be of real assistance, and they have put the issue on the front burner in nearly every international forum conceivable. And I think that that has been well done. Now, there are a couple of things that are helping us that I believe Guyanese need to be aware of, because Colin's right. If it's a fight, we lose. So how do we avoid the fight? The way to avoid the fight is to calmly and rationally point out what international law requires, calmly and rationally remind everyone, including Venezuela, that this has always been a hemisphere of peace, and peaceful resolution is the way to solve it, as was done more than 100 years ago, and I should continue. International law should prevail. The issue of the Brazilians, fortunately for Guyana, the terrain, the geography, the topography between Venezuela and Guyana along the Schomburg line is impenetrable forest and huge mountains up in the north. And in fact, the easiest access route, if someone was to mobilize, would be further down south where there's savanna. And this is what motivated the Brazilians to mobilize in anticipation. And it never happened, but they did mobilize. That if there was to be movement by Venezuela into Essequibo, it would have to be across Brazil. over those savannas. And Brazil very, very quickly moved to prevent any infringement on its sovereign integrity that way. So there's a difficulty that way that the Venezuelans face. The second difficulty that the Venezuelans face is the wealth that they are concerned about. And, you know, I heard the folk in this forum talk about Venezuela can't be concerned with the oil because they have so much oil already, and that would just be greed. But I think we all recognize that greed is probably the predominant human characteristic. So don't let's be surprised that they may be greed. But the greed in this case is oil, which is offshore. So it would take a great deal of effort, militarily, administratively, every other way you can think about, for Venezuela to trouble themselves with a huge swathe of land west of the Essequibo River, when really the wealth is offshore. And that's where I think we are in a happier position, because what is offshore is an American-owned asset. Those rigs belong to a US company. And it is my belief, and at the end of the day, I think we all have to acknowledge, we don't know US policy, we don't know what happens in the halls of power in Washington, D.C., we can only speculate from outside looking out. But I do genuinely believe that it would be foolhardy for Venezuela to send any gunboat out to an American-owned oil rig in the offshore Essequibo, in the commercial zone of Guyana, offshore in Essequibo, to interfere with American operations there under license from the Guyana government. So I don't see that happening. I don't see any land issue happening. And insofar as a conversation between President Ali and President Maduro is concerned, I want to urge it should in no way extend to a discussion of the dispute, because Venezuela has been agitating and insisting that there must be bilateral talks on the dispute. And to say that if it's not on the dispute, then it can't be on anything else, I think is a bit hasty, because there are a great many issues that can be discussed. I've heard of Venezuelan boats going into Guyana territorial waters. That can be discussed. I've heard of the talk of the military camp that is on the Venezuelan side of the boundary, but that has been ratcheted up apparently. That can be broached. None of those subjects have anything to do with the dispute. The dispute being, is the arbitration award invalid, and who does Essequibo belong to? But there is a great deal that can be discussed to ensure that the status quo remains, that the peace in Guyana, the peace in the region remains, but without venturing into a discussion of the pros and cons, the merits and demerits of the issues which are pending before the International Court of Justice. And I think that that is what needs to be clear and what needs to be put in black and white in capital letters before there is a discussion. Or else the Venezuelans will make a great deal and get a great deal of propaganda mileage out of it. And that is what I'm afraid of.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those points. Of course, they could also talk about trade. We did used to sell a lot of rice to Venezuela up until 2015, I think it was. Former President Donald Ramutar.
Yeah, just a couple of things. On the question of diplomacy, I think that is not so much of a strong point in my view that Colin has been making it out. Sure, of course, we can try to improve and have more diplomats and better and what have you, but so far we haven't been doing so bad. Venezuela is isolated on this matter. In the whole of the South American continent, it's only Nicaragua that has made a statement in support of Venezuela. So we have, I think we have been doing very well in the sense of garnering support internationally for our case, um, and our case is very, very strong, and because of that, we have very strong support. So, um, while sure there's always room for improvement in any area, I don't think that we're doing that bad as far as diplomacy is concerned. To have Venezuela on the back foot, that we took it to the Security Council, in at the United Nations, and we seem to have pretty good, although there is no official release about the outcome of that initial discussion. It appears that we are on pretty good ground. I know that in England we have been having very, very strong support from the whole of the parliament, on both sides of the aisle in the United Kingdom. Guyana's case is being supported very, very well, and almost everywhere else you can think about, we have had strong support. On the question of educating our people on this issue, I think that the education not got to be on this issue. One of my disappointments is that I think that we don't teach our own history in our school. We do Caribbean history, which is only a small amount of history, and even if it's not a CAPE subject or a CXC subject, even if it's a local exam, I think we should be making textbooks and teaching our history in Guyana, not necessarily just teaching about this border issue, but on the history of our country. That is what I think should be done, and have a team set up of educationalists, historians, and so forth, to help write some textbooks for our schools. That is what I would say. As far as migrants is concerned, I don't think we should have the very, very strong position that Colin has been taking, because a lot of the Venezuelans who are coming home are Guyanese who went over there in the late 70s and 80s when things were very bad in Guyana. And we must not forget that Venezuela helped us a lot at that point in time. And many of those are the people and their children who are coming back. There are also Venezuelans who are coming back, but a lot of the people who are migrating back got some type of Guyanese roots, along with other Venezuelans and so forth. So we got to be careful of how we talk about these migrants. Not because we have a quarrel, not because the Venezuelan government, not that we have a quarrel, not because the Venezuelan government is trying to snatch some of our land illegally and wrongfully, that we should take it out on the Venezuelan people. They're going through a difficult point in time. And we must not forget our own history too. When we were in a bad thing, we went all over the Caribbean, into Venezuela, all over the place our people were. That is why our people are all over the place at this point in time. So those are some of the immediate remarks I would like to make. That the one other point I would say though is we must not behave as if we are an island and nothing happens. And I don't think as the people that we make our position felt strong enough about what is happening in other parts of the world. And for instance, what is happening now in the Gaza area, what is happening in Israel and Palestine, apart from what the brutality and the sadistic nature of the killing of the people there, what we're actually witnessing is the breakdown of international law and the breakdown of international institutions. And those are things that goes against us, because we're a small country, and international law and strong international institutions is what is for in our favor. And that is why I think that we, not only at the governmental level, but even at civil society level, we should make our position very, very clear on some of these international issues that is clearly destroying the whole foundation that the international relation was built on since 1945. That dismantlement is taking place. The United Nations is being discredited every day, and that those things are not in our interest. That is why we should be more vocal on many of these matters. That's all I would like to say at this time.
Colin, we don't have too much time left, so if you may make some final points and wrap up.
Yeah, so one of the other discussions that emanated from this whole controversy is the ability to protect ourselves. I think given the new realities of the world today, we cannot really afford that just being friendly neighbors is just going to cut it today. And so I believe that since we have a windfall of cash from oil funds and so forth, I think we need to really sit down and I think we need to invest in our security. I think part of that is going to create not only trying to make it a safe place for people, but also to contribute to the safety and prosperity of the region as well. Similarly, many countries who've gotten this newfound of wealth, there have to be a way to protect it. And so I think that this is one of the things that I've sat and I've thought about. Yes, I do agree we are committed to a zone of peace. I do agree that we shouldn't be bad neighbors for the Venezuelans who were coming in because of the refugee crisis that they were having in their country. We welcome them. I wasn't by any shot saying that we should antagonize them because of what's happening, but it preceded this controversy, this latest part of the controversy. Years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, in Region 1, we've had this mass incursion that had happened when the sanctions came in, and the last government was making provisions and finding housing and so forth. But I do believe that we need to address this with them. And we know some of them go to Brazil, some of them go to Colombia, but some as well come to Guyana. And I'm not referencing to the ones that are coming because they were family or relatives or so forth. And I just want to say to those people, I know a lot of people I've spoken to, there is a sense of anxiety. There's a sense of concern. I think that we're gonna be fine. I think we're gonna be all right. And I know some people out of fear and stuff have canceled trips to the Essequibo regions and so forth. My suggestion, I think you should, with caution, continue to go about your daily lives. I don't really foresee there being many a great of incursion happen. At the heart and core of this, we are one nation together, so we may not have the same political orientation. We may not agree on everything altogether, but I think one of the things we can agree on is we're all Guyanese. We are committed to the sovereignty, the protection, and the well-being of this great land. All 3 counties, all 10 administrative region and towns. And so with this, I'd like to say that I'm also privileged to be in the stead of 2 great friends, 2 great luminaries, former president and Timothy as well, and a professor as well. It's great to have this discussion with you.
If I may make one quick point,
please,
just 1 minute. So far, not a drop of oil has been produced from the Essequibo area. It is true that the Stabroek block has gone across into the Essequibo area, but at this point in time, not a drop of oil was being produced in the Essequibo area. All the oil that is being pumped now is from between the Maikoni and the Bobbies River areas that is coming out. Nothing is coming out from the Essequibo side of that block. And every morning I can see the helicopters going out there, and they're all heading northeast towards not south, not northwest, west area, more northeast area than way.
Yes, I think you're right. The extraction of the oil has been coming from the Berbice area. Be that as it may, let's ask Timothy Jonas to conclude and how we prepare for Venezuela.
Thank you, Al. I think that although technically President Ramatar's remark might be correct, I think that what he needs to consider is that if you draw your line of influence using Essequibo as the international boundary as Venezuela has been doing, then the maritime border suddenly looks very different. But I don't think we should even have that discussion. Essequibo belongs to us, and I don't care where the oil is coming from. We need to make that clear and say it loudly. Now, there's a point that the lawyer in me wants to bring out, and I want to raise this because it shows how ridiculous the Venezuelan approach is. If you have an arbitration as we have had, and the arbitrators decide, and therefore we are reconciled and bound by the arbitrator, if someone wants to challenge that arbitration award for fraud, they do so by cogent evidence of fraud, that one of the arbitrators took a bribe, or one of them was unduly influenced, or his family was threatened or something, and that motivated and influenced his decision wrongly in favor of somebody. We have not seen a scrap of evidence from Venezuela to support their bald and unsupportable and indefensible contention that something was wrong with the arbitration award and it should be impugned because of fraud. But even if we go down that road, and by some miracle, they were able to produce that evidence, the result would not be, as Venezuela is seeking to suggest now, that they own Essequibo. The result would be that we go back to the pre-arbitration position, which is that we are claiming up to the Orinoco, and they are claiming up to the Essequibo, and that dispute would have to be determined. So even if they were vindicated in what they are trying to suggest, which they can never be vindicated, the conclusion, the end result of that vindication would not be the position they are contending for now. And I think that that point needs to be made again, rationally, deliberately, carefully, with dignity in every single forum that we can find internationally, because they have absolutely no right to be looking across the Cayenne River at us in any way, any form, because they have not produced a shred of evidence. And even if they had, it would simply mean you got to do that arbitration over again, not that they own Essequibo. So I think that these arguments need to be made over and over and over repeatedly, rationally, calmly, using an ethical, moral, relying on international law approach. And I agree with Colin that once that is done, we will have the end result that we want. And we will be able to go back to what Guyanese are all comfortable and familiar with, which is the PPPNC tug of war and tit for tat. And I think everybody will want to see that again.
And that's where we'll be heading once this matter is resolved, I think. But I don't see an early resolution to this conflict, Timothy?
I don't see the resolution, but what I do see shortly is a final determination on the merits from the ICJ. And once we have that determination on the merits, then we can stand up and shine a spotlight on it and challenge anybody to question the methodology and the approach by the ICJ in how they reach their conclusion, because that will put us in a stronger position.
I'm afraid
that was a strong view. We should advocate, particularly small countries without any big armies and so forth. I think that we should, because if you look at all the border problems all over the world, very few are settled by the contending parties talking to each other. And therefore, these countries need help. Venezuela, big problem, as far as I see, is that they don't know, none of the parties want to, even if they recognize all that we're talking here to be true, they're looking behind them all the time about their political support and their political survival, what they have done in the minds of the people themselves. But this can help Venezuela as much as anyone else, because if the court, when the court rules, and likely rule in our favor because our case is extremely strong, then no politician in Venezuela will say that they made that concession. That if they would just accept international law, the rule of law, and so forth, it helps them. Look at how long we were wrangling with Suriname, and Suriname had the same thing. They also came and put away a boat or chased away a boat that was inspected for oil some years ago. But when we settled that maritime border, it's settled. Suriname accept that the court's ruling, and the matter is settled. It didn't create a ripple in Suriname. So I think that on these issues, border issues, there is a big role for the international community to work on, to create a mechanism that can help the parties involved to resolve their issues. Not speaking only about our issue, but generally border issues that affect different parts of the world.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm afraid that would be the last word tonight. And thank you for taking time out of your very, very busy scheduled program for tonight. And viewers and listeners for watching, listening us this evening. Thank you. Good night. Let's see what happens tomorrow, Thursday, in the discussion among the presidents of the two countries and observers. Good night.